So this is a question from Mitch via YouTube, who asks, has China been mentioned once during the election campaign? And then what will a Starmer government do if Xi Jinping invades Taiwan? It's really two questions, isn't it?
Two questions.
Two for the price of one.
So if you take the first one, I mean, Andrew Marr and I actually briefly discussed this on an earlier episode of the podcast, and neither of us thought that it had.
That China had been mentioned.
No, we don't
during the
think it
election.
had been. I mean, it's possible that it may have been in passing, but it certainly didn't feature prominently at all. So
Did that surprise you?
it surprised me, but then I suppose because China is so important, but actually we don't have much power. Our policy will have to depend on what our other allies are doing. And also, elections tend to be dominated by domestic affairs. Would that surprise you?
It didn't surprise me so much because Labour's position and the Conservatives' position are actually quite similar. And elections are all about trying to find dividing lines and wedge issues. And if your stance on a issue is we'd basically do pretty much what the other guys say they're going to do, it's not in anyone's interest to talk about it. So I don't think its lack of attention in the election campaign should be taken as a sign that
they haven't thought
about it,
Yeah.
or they're not taking it seriously. It's just a sign that it's not one of those things that they wanted to turn into a wedge issue, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I doubt it's going to swing many votes either. As you say, they're both broadly on the same page. As for the second question, that is really interesting. I'm going to delegate to David Muir, who was Director of Strategy for Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister between 2008 and 2010. Now, he wrote about this last year in the New Statesman in autumn. And, Mitch is right that this isn't some remote possibility. It really could happen. In 2027, it's 100 years of the founding of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and their aim, it was always said, was to restore China in full. And obviously, China claim Taiwan is part of China. So what David Muir wrote for us is that were Keir Starmer to get the call from first John Healey and then whoever the President of the United States is at that time saying, are you with us? What's going to happen? He says he's going to face three choices, basically. The first he described as US 1940 strategy, and that would be to join with the Europeans to offer material support, not participating in any naval blockade that would have to take place. And that would, of course, have quite a detrimental impact on UK-US relations. The second option, the next notch up, if you like, he calls USA 1942. And this would see the UK becoming part of a war coalition, joining the High Command and the US-China blockade, offering significant material support and sending a Trident submarine, perhaps, to guarantee Australia, but we wouldn't send troops. So we'd fall short of that. And then the third option, called USA 1944, that's all of the above plus troops. So we're fully in, if you like. And that would be welcomed by both Australia and the United States, but would a Labour Party, he asks, still traumatised by the failed Iraq intervention from 2003, would they support it, and would a Starmer premiership survive it? And he just makes this point that over the years, Labour administrations have come to be defined by foreign policy interventions, and obviously we've spoken about that on the podcast as well, and Katie Stallard, our colleague based in the States, has written really thoughtfully about that.
The answer is also that it depends a huge amount on who's president of the United States. And all of those options are kind of predicated on the idea that the US would have a president who would want to intervene in some way. I think given what we've seen in the US in the last week or so, we can't make any assumptions whatsoever about what a US response might be.
No, and my guess was, would be if the US did nothing, then of course we would do nothing.
Or we'd be put in a
very
would be put in a very difficult position.
Yeah.
Obviously, the UK is part of this alliance AUKUS with the US and Australia that was set up in a big part, to challenge China's dominance in the region. So I think there'd be big questions there from Australia and from the rest of sort of the Asia Pacific. But without the US being a player, we just don't know.